Welcome to Eleonora's world, my fellow and lovely members of the Lumos Lounge, your destination for magical stories and unforgettable journeys. Don't forget to comment the video. And for all of you that aren't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications. Thank you for joining and helping to keep the magic alive. And now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Chapter 16. The Curious Case of Ronald Weasley. Ron Weasley considered himself an expert on Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. After all, he'd spent the better part of the last 4 years as their best friend. He knew how Harry's brow furrowed when he was frustrated, how Hermione's lips pursed when she thought someone was being particularly thick, usually him, and how the two of them could bicker endlessly yet somehow still seem closer than anyone else in the castle. But lately, something had shifted. It wasn't anything obvious. Harry and Hermione still studied together, still bickered, still sat beside each other at meals. But Ron had caught the occasional exchange of a look that lingered too long or a smile that seemed to carry some secret meaning. And then there was the disappearing act. Lately, Harry and Hermione seemed to vanish together at odd moments, leaving Ron to wonder what, exactly, they were up to. "They're hiding something," Ron muttered to himself one afternoon, pacing the Gryffindor common room. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, but Ron hardly noticed as he mulled over the growing mystery. Maybe they're working on something for the tournament, he mused. Or maybe they've joined some secret club, like the Slug Club, only more annoying. He paused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Or maybe, his eyes widened as a truly horrifying thought struck him. Maybe they're planning a prank on me. The very idea made Ron shudder. He had to get to the bottom of this, and quickly. Ron, the investigator. That evening, Ron set his plan into motion. He would shadow Harry and Hermione, observing their behavior and gathering evidence. If they were hiding something, and he was certain they were, he would find out. The opportunity presented itself sooner than he'd expected. After dinner, Ron spotted Harry and Hermione slipping out of the Great Hall together, their heads bent close in conversation. With a stealth that would have made Moody proud, Ron followed them at a safe distance. He trailed them through the castle, ducking behind statues and into alcoves whenever they glanced over their shoulders. They stopped in front of the library, exchanging a few whispered words before disappearing inside. "Interesting," Ron muttered, peering around the corner. "What are you two up to?" He slipped into the library, keeping to the shadows as he followed them to the far corner. They were seated at a small table, their heads close as they examined a parchment covered in Hermione's neat handwriting. Ron edged closer, straining to hear their conversation. "Are you sure this will work?" Harry was saying, his voice low. "It has to," Hermione replied. "We just need to be careful." Careful? About what? Ron's mind raced as he tried to piece together the clues. Whatever they were planning, it sounded serious. Maybe they really were plotting a prank, or something even bigger. But before Ron could get any closer, Madame Pince appeared, glaring at him over her spectacles. "Weasley, stop skulking around and find a book, or I'll have you out of here." "Yes, Madame Pince," Ron said hastily, retreating to a nearby shelf. He waited until she'd moved on before sneaking another glance at Harry and Hermione. But to his frustration, they were gone. The hallway encounter. Ron spent the next few days continuing his investigation. He followed Harry and Hermione to classes, watched them at meals, and eavesdropped on their conversations whenever he could. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't figure out what they were hiding. One evening, he caught them leaving the common room together and decided to follow them again. They made their way toward the astronomy tower, and Ron's suspicions hit an all-time high. The astronomy tower was notorious for its privacy. If they were going there, it could only mean one thing. They were meeting someone, or doing something they didn't want anyone to know about.
Ron crept up the stairs, his heart pounding as he imagined all the possibilities.
When he reached the top, he peered around the corner, his jaw dropping at what he saw. Harry and Hermione were sitting close together, laughing softly as they looked up at the stars. Harry's hand rested lightly on Hermione's, and the warmth between them was undeniable. Ron's eyes widened as the realization hit him like a bludger to the chest. "They're together," he whispered to himself, his mind reeling. "But how? When?" Before he could process what he'd seen, Harry glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing. Ron? Is that you? Ron yelped, stumbling backward and nearly toppling down the stairs. No, just passing by. Carry on. He bolted down the stairs, his mind racing. If Harry and Hermione were a couple, why hadn't they told him? Were they worried about how he'd react? Did they think he wouldn't approve? Or maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe they weren't a couple. Maybe they were just, what was the word Hermione always used? Platonic? Yeah, Ron muttered to himself as he hurried back to the common room. Platonic. That's it. Totally normal. Nothing weird going on. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Chapter 17. Threads of Suspicion. The Gryffindor common room was bustling with its usual evening energy. The warmth of the fire flickered against the stone walls, and laughter echoed from a group of first years huddled near the fireplace. Harry sat on one of the plush armchairs, leaning slightly forward with a book propped on his knee. Hermione sat beside him on the couch, her own book in hand, though her eyes frequently flickered up to meet his. Across from them, Ron fidgeted uncomfortably on a stool. His gaze darted between Harry and Hermione, his expression one of suspicion poorly masked by an attempt at indifference. For days now, Ron had been noticing small, subtle changes in their behavior. The way Hermione would laugh just a little too brightly at Harry's jokes, or how Harry's gaze seemed to linger on her a fraction longer than it used to. "What are you two up to?" Ron finally blurted out, his voice cutting through the hum of the room. Hermione blinked up from her book, feigning confusion. "What do you mean, Ron?" Ron narrowed his eyes. "Don't play dumb. You've been acting weird lately. Both of you. And don't think I haven't noticed." Harry closed his book and leaned back in his chair, doing his best to appear casual. "Weird how?" "Weird like you're keeping something from me," Ron said, crossing his arms over his chest. "You've got that look, the same one you had when you were sneaking off to the Triwizard Tournament tasks." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "Ron, you're being ridiculous. Harry and I haven't been sneaking off anywhere." "Oh, really?" Ron's tone was laced with disbelief. "Then why do you both disappear every other evening? And why are you always whispering when you think I'm not paying attention?" Harry exchanged a quick glance with Hermione, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't keep the secret forever, but the timing still didn't feel right. "Ron," Harry began, his voice calm, "you're reading too much into things. Hermione and I have just been studying. You know, owls coming up and all that." Ron's scowl deepened. "Studying? That's your excuse? You expect me to believe that?" "It happens to be true," Hermione said firmly, setting her book down. "Not that I'd expect you to understand the concept of preparing for exams ahead of time." Ron huffed, but before he could retort, a group of second years noisily passed by, momentarily distracting him. Harry took the opportunity to lean closer to Hermione, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "We're going to have to tell him soon," he murmured. Hermione nodded, her expression troubled. "I know, but not like this. He's already on edge. We need to find the right moment." "You two do realize I'm sitting right here, don't you?" Ron's voice cut through their quiet exchange, and they both straightened up guiltily. Harry cleared his throat. "Sorry, Ron. Just talking about potions." Ron didn't look convinced, but he let it slide, leaning back in his seat and muttering something under his breath. Hermione gave Harry a meaningful look, and he knew she was silently urging him to remain patient. Later that evening, the common room had quieted down as most of the students retired to their dormitories. Harry and Hermione remained by the fire, their books forgotten as they spoke in hushed tones. Ron had retreated to bed earlier, though not before shooting them one last suspicious glance. "We should just get it over with," Harry said, running a hand through his messy hair. "It's not like we're doing anything wrong. He'll come around eventually." Hermione sighed. "It's not about whether or not we're doing something wrong. It's about how he'll react. Ron, he's sensitive about things like this." "Yeah, but avoiding it isn't going to help either," Harry countered. "The longer we wait, the worse it'll be when he finds out." Hermione looked into the fire, her face illuminated by its warm glow. You're right. Tomorrow, then." We'll tell him after breakfast. Harry nodded, though his stomach twisted at the thought. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how they approached it, Ron's reaction would be anything but simple. A sleepless night. As Harry lay in bed that night, staring up at the canopy above him, his mind raced with possibilities. What if Ron felt betrayed? What if this changed everything? The trio had faced so much together over the years, and the thought of losing that bond because of his and Hermione's relationship was almost too much to bear. But then he thought of Hermione's smile, the way her hand felt in his, the way she looked at him like he was someone who mattered. That was worth fighting for. And if Ron truly was his best friend, he'd understand. Eventually, with a deep breath, Harry closed his eyes, willing himself to sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but he knew they would face them together, just as they always had. Chapter 18. The Truth Revealed. The following morning dawned with a soft, golden light filtering through the frost-laden windows of the Gryffindor common room. Harry and Hermione had spent most of the previous evening debating how best to approach Ron. Their decision to tell him together came with both relief and dread. As they made their way to breakfast, their steps fell in sync, a silent agreement forming between them. Hermione had insisted that honesty was the best course of action, though Harry's stomach twisted at the thought of confronting Ron's temper. The great hall was buzzing as usual, the clatter of plates and cheerful chatter masking the anxiety building between Harry and Hermione. They spotted Ron at the Gryffindor table, his red hair unmistakable as he gestured animatedly about something, likely Quidditch. "Ready?" Hermione whispered, glancing at Harry. He nodded, though his palms felt clammy. "Let's get it over with." They approached the table and sat down on either side of Ron, whose fork paused mid-air as he noticed their serious expressions. "All right, what's with the faces?" Ron asked, raising an eyebrow. "You two look like you've seen a boggart." Hermione cleared her throat. "Ron, we need to talk." "Blame, that sounds ominous," Ron said, lowering his fork and looking between them. "What's going on?" Harry took a deep breath, his hand brushing against Hermione's under the table. "Ron, there's something we need to tell you. And it's important." Ron's eyes narrowed slightly, his usual cheerful demeanor slipping. "Okay, let's hear it then." Hermione exchanged a quick glance with Harry before speaking. "Harry and I, well, we've been spending a lot of time together lately, and it's because we've realized we have feelings for each other." Ron blinked, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he set his fork down and leaned back in his seat. "Feelings for each other? As in, romantic feelings?" Hermione nodded, her cheeks flushing. Yes. There was a long pause before Ron finally spoke. "Well, that explains a lot." Harry and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. "Explains a lot," Harry echoed. Ron shrugged. "I mean, you've both been acting all weird lately. Whispering, disappearing to who knows where, looking at each other like you're sharing some secret. I'm not completely daft, you know." Hermione let out a small laugh of relief, but Harry still felt the need to clarify. "So, you're not upset?" Ron frowned, considering his answer. "I wouldn't say I'm thrilled about it. I mean, it's a bit weird, isn't it? The three of us have always been a team, and now this. We don't want things to change," Hermione said earnestly. "You're still our best friend, Ron. That's not going to change." Ron's expression softened slightly, though a hint of doubt lingered in his eyes. "I get that. But it's going to take some getting used to. You two, together," he shuddered playfully. "It's a bit sickening, really." Harry laughed, relieved to hear Ron's teasing tone. "You'll survive." "Yeah, well, don't go snogging in front of me or anything," Ron said, wrinkling his nose. "Wouldn't dream of it," Hermione replied with a grin. The conversation shifted back to lighter topics, and the trio's dynamic began to feel more familiar. Still, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that Ron's acceptance wasn't as complete as it seemed. There was something in the way Ron avoided looking directly at them, a tension that hinted at unspoken thoughts. Later that evening, Harry found himself alone in the common room, staring into the fire. Hermione had gone to the library, and Ron was off playing Exploding Snap with Seamus and Dee. The quiet gave Harry too much time to think. What if Ron was just pretending to be okay with it? What if this changed everything between them? Harry couldn't bear the thought of losing Ron as a friend, but he also couldn't deny how much Hermione meant to him. Their connection felt like a lifeline, something he hadn't realized he needed until it was there. Lost in thought again, Hermione's voice pulled him from his reverie. He turned to see her standing by the armchair, a small smile on her face. She sat down beside him, her hand finding his as if it belonged there. "Just thinking about Ron," Harry admitted. "And us? I don't want to mess things up." "You're not," Hermione said firmly. "Ron will come around. He just needs time." Harry nodded, though his doubts lingered. Hermione squeezed his hand, her gaze steady and reassuring. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," she said softly. Harry smiled, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. "You always know what to say." Hermione leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in silence, the firelight dancing across their faces. Despite the challenges ahead, Harry felt a flicker of hope. They would face whatever came next, together. Chapter 19. New Beginnings, Old Shadows. The following days felt strangely normal, despite the whirlwind of emotions that had passed between the trio. Hogwarts continued its usual rhythm, but for Harry, Hermione, and Ron, there was a sense of something unspoken hovering between them. While their bond had withstood the turbulence, the cracks were still fresh, and the air occasionally felt heavier than usual. Harry and Hermione sat side by side at the Gryffindor table, their shoulders brushing as they reached for toast at the same time. Ron sat across from them, chewing thoughtfully on a sausage. His gaze flicked between the two of them, his brow furrowed as if he were deep in thought. "What?" Harry finally asked, his tone half nervous, half amused. Ron swallowed and shrugged. "Just trying to get used to this, you know. You two being all—" He waved a hand vague. "Couple? Why?" Hermione rolled her eyes, though her cheeks tinted pink. "We're still the same people, Ron." "Yeah, except now you hold hands and give each other those looks." Ron shuddered dramatically. "It's weird. It's weird." Harry chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll survive." "Barely," Ron muttered, though the corner of his mouth quirked upward in a reluctant smile. He reached for another piece of toast, clearly still adjusting but trying to make the best of it. The library meeting. Later that evening, Hermione insisted on dragging Harry and Ron to the library for some much-needed study time. Ron grumbled the entire way, trailing behind them with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I'm telling you, Hermione," Ron said as they reached the towering double doors of the library. "There's more to life than revising." "Like failing your owls?" Hermione retorted without missing a beat. Harry stifled a laugh as Ron's face turned pink. "Touch," he muttered, following them inside. The library was dimly lit, the high shelves casting long shadows across the aisles. Hermione led the way to their usual corner, where a stack of books was already waiting for her. She slid into a seat and immediately began rifling through the pages, her quill poised for action. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance before sitting down. "You've got to admire her dedication," Harry said with a smirk. "That's one word for it," Ron muttered, though there was no real venom in his tone. He leaned back in his chair, idly twirling a quill between his fingers. As Hermione launched into an explanation of a particularly tricky potion ingredient, Ron's gaze flicked between her and Harry. He couldn't help but notice the small, subtle touches they shared, a brush of fingers, a fleeting glance. It wasn't overt, but it was there, and it was driving him mad. "You know," Ron said suddenly, interrupting Hermione's monologue, "I never thought I'd say this, but you two are even more insufferable now than before." Hermione arched an eyebrow. "Insufferable?" "Yeah," Ron said with a grin. "All this intellectual flirting. It's unbearable." Harry laughed, throwing a balled-up scrap of parchment at Ron. "Says the guy who can't even spell intellectual." Ron dodged the projectile and grinned. "Touch, mate." Shadows in the corridor. As the trio left the library and made their way back to the Gryffindor common room, the castle seemed unusually quiet. The torches lining the corridors flickered faintly, their light casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. "I don't like this," Ron muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Feels off." Hermione frowned, her steps slowing as she scanned the corridor. "It's probably nothing, but stay alert. Harry's hand instinctively moved to his wand, his nerves on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The sensation clung to him like a shadow, heavy and persistent. They quickened their pace, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. When they finally reached the portrait of the fat lady, Harry let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Password?" the fat lady asked, her tone impatient. "Fanged Frisbee," Hermione said crisply. The portrait swung open, and they stepped inside. The warmth and chatter of their housemates quickly dispelled the tension, but Harry couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of his mind. Something was coming, and it wouldn't be good. Late night reflection. Later that night, the common room had emptied, leaving only the flickering firelight and the faint hum of the wind outside. Harry sat in one of the armchairs near the hearth, staring into the flames. Hermione appeared from the girls' dormitory, a book tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw him, her expression softening. "Can't sleep?" Harry shook his head. "Just thinking." Hermione settled into the chair beside him, setting the book on the table. "About what?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the fire. "Everything. You, Ron. The tournament. This feeling that something bad is about to happen." Hermione reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. "Whatever it is, we'll face it. Together, together." Her words were steady and sure, and Harry felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. He turned to her, his lips curving into a faint smile. "You always know what to say, don't you?" Hermione's eyes sparkled with warmth. "Someone has to keep you grounded, Potter." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire casting golden light across their faces. Despite the lingering unease, Harry felt a sense of calm settle over him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they would face it as they always had. Together. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. If you'd like to support the channel, check out my Amazon wishlist or consider making a donation. Every little bit helps to keep the magic alive. See you next time, and until then, take care and keep dreaming.